Welcome to History is Here to Help on ThinkTech Hawaii. I'm your host, Jay Fidell. This episode is called The Rise of Populism, Threat and Opportunity, Risks to Recognize and Opportunities to Harness. Our guest for the show is Dr. Paul Scott, Professor Emeritus, Kansai Gaidai University. Welcome to the show, Paul.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a timely topic. I can't wait to talk.
Well, populism is here to stay. We have it in this country, and right wing populists are winning elections in Europe, Asia, and South America. What is going on? Can you help us understand what populism is and why it is rising, and what is historical background and dynamic?
Yeah, it's a great question. Populism is not a unique American political movement, but we don't hear a lot about it until the last 20 or 30 years. And not to give an American history lecture here, but there was a populist party in America. And in 1892, it was led by William Jennings Bryan, who ran for president 3 times. And Bryan is very, very famous or infamous for lots of reasons. He was the lawyer in the Scopes monkey trial as well. But that populist movement in America, in the 1890s, represented farmers and working class Americans who were frustrated with economic inequality, frustrated with monopolies, frustrated with political corruption. And there was also obviously a element of, well, a strong element of racism from some of the populists, not Bryan, but there was between 1880 and 1920, 10 million immigrants came into the United States. And the immigrants were, of course, welcomed by many, but of course, they were not welcomed by labor. They were because they undercut wages. Sound familiar? And they competed for jobs. And of course, that sort of nativist tendency of sort of native born Americans, whatever that means, was around. And we're talking 140 years ago, 140 years ago. So we have it, we have the rise again. And again, it's as to do analysis, we need, if you want to call it conflict, we'll call it conflict because it's conflict drivers. What's driving the conflict? And also, you have, what I lecture when I talk about conflict resolution, not conflict management, which is different, but that's another lecture or another talk. It's conflict drivers, but you also have to have conflict dampeners. You have someone that has to throw water or a wet towel over the embers. And today, around the world, because it's a global phenomena, populism, which I said was not generally in general use up until the 1960s or 70s. It wasn't in general use because it sort of lacks precision. We don't have a definition because it's not an ideology. It's very, what one writer called it, very thin centered, that it's just basically the society is separated into two camps that are antagonistic to each other, the people against the corrupt elite. And both sides. And it's interesting because many people talk about right wing populism, and some people are very emotional that is anti democratic. But when you talk about left wing populism, to people that, for example, really hate Mr. Trump, then left wing populism says, oh, we agree with that. So that's why the threat and opportunity is there definitely is something happening out there in the among the general population, and we have to be careful because it's emotions and it's emotions driven by that imprecise social media. And what social media does, it's like a bullhorn. It gives everyone a louder voice. I could say that more than they deserve, because we could another lecture on social media. I teach a course on social media, um, but I teach a course on populism. Is that um, you get what is the most perfect propaganda, which is a combination of truth, half truths, and lies. And people, so the loudest voice expressing a very simplistic message um, uh, can gain a lot of followers. And whatever we think of Mr. Trump, he was brilliant. And forgive me, he was brilliant in the use of social media and realizing that he could tap into, I'll call it an anger or at least a dissatisfaction. And it's a dissatisfaction that goes back to the populist movement of the 1890s. And it's income inequality.
Hmm.
And it's driven by income inequality. And, you know, it's that top 10% that are earning, and these are real figures, 8.3 times the bottom 10%. And that top 10% is $138,000 a year. Um, Try to live in New York City on $138,000 a year. Um, but the bottom 10%, what their average income is $16,000 a year. And I dare you to try to live on $16,000 a year almost anywhere in America.
What I
Just
get is that this has arisen in recent times and would arise again depending on this driver, and the driver is income inequality.
that's right.
And we had that in the later part of the last part of the 19th century, where the railroads and the banks took advantage of the farmers and paid less for crops and so forth. And so there was this big inequality between the farmers and the East Coast elites, and the farmers got angry. And it's that equality that makes them angry, and it divides them politically. And
That's right.
so, it seems to me that if I give you, hypothetically, a society with that inequality, I am going to get populism. It's one follows the other, and there you have it. But the question I would put to you is, where does it go? We know that it's not particularly helpful to democracy, and so democracy could easily fail under populism, whether it's from the right or the left. But where does it take us?
Well, that's really interesting because I subscribe to lots of journals, the Journal of Democracy, and I did a democracy index as well. I was the project director of measuring democracy. And, if there is a crisis of democracy, that the enemy of democracy is democracy itself. Because the only thing you have to do, to make this simplistic, I'm running for election. I need 10 votes. I know three out of the 10 don't vote. So that means I only need seven. So I only have to get four out of seven and I win. So when we look at these sort of mandates and these people who are as well trained as I am, which I have a lot of training, they should stop using the word mandate, because as soon as you win an election, you have a mandate. And Barack Obama, he won by, who has won an election with more than 52 or 53% of the vote in the last 30 years? And the answer is no one. So the landslide of getting 55% of the vote, I don't want to talk about Richard Nixon. He got 59 in 1972. Is just, these are highly contested elections. And if the political consultants that make a fortune, and man, I'd like to be one because I wouldn't mind making a fortune, is you have to have a message that resonates with enough people in enough states. We're talking about the U.S., but we can talk about other states. A message that resonates, and the message that resonates is based on, um, I would call it the 4 Ds. And there is distrust of experts, elites, and institutions. And part of this is from COVID. Part of this is, I don't want to talk about the deep state, but part of this is that whoever they are, they've lied to us. And my father's generation trusted the government, and my generation trusted it a little bit, not as much as my father's generation, but we criticized it. But now, among the generation that's I teach students that were born, that were, they're college students now, so their formative years are with COVID, um, and also economic collapse, at least one, the housing market. And so there's just distrust of political parties, there's distrust of elites, low level of public trust in the classical establishment. My goodness, who trusts Congress? No one. Who would trust the American Medical Association? I'm not sure. And even in institutions that had high degrees of trust, like the judiciary, in the United States, that people say we don't trust them. Um, what institution do Americans trust? The military. And that's interesting. There's also a distrust, communal identity, patterns of globalization. Um, where's our community? Who? There's a book called Bowling in America, and people used to go out bowling. They used to play bridge. There was a sense of community, and that's fractured. It really is fractured. Um, where are you most lonely? In a elevator. You don't know anyone, and you're afraid to talk. Um, and it's funny, since I live in Paris, and I mean to talk to them much. I don't have a I don't have a washing machine because I have a small apartment. I go to the local laundromat, which thank goodness is 25 yards away, and there are lots of tourists, because I'm in Paris, and they don't know how to use the machines. And they ask me, and I help them. We get into discussions. And I especially like to talk to the Americans because well, number one, we have to be careful. They're wealthy, they're here, they're traveling, they're different. And they're deeply upset about what's happening in that polarization. We are hyper polarized, tribalized society, period. Um, there's also the neoliberal promise, and I can use my hands here, that the rich can get richer, but the poor will get richer. And what we have to do is, open markets, open borders, and the boom and bust cycle is over. Well, this is a crisis of neoliberalism. So your question about a crisis of democracy is also a crisis of capitalism. And the crisis of capitalism is, um, can I put responsible capitalism together? Will people laugh at me? Um, it's really the visible, conspicuous wealth of the billionaire class and their politics. So John D. Rockefeller, I did this because I'm a professional. John D. Rockefeller is the wealthiest man in America as percentage of American GDP. He almost had 2% of American GDP back then. Fabulously wealthy, much more than Musk and Bezos, who just got married. $500 million yachts. Becomes immoral. There's Theories of Justice, which is a long book, and it's very controversial. But it's when there's an inconsistency that there's a moral element to this. Jeff Bezos, can he pay his workers more? Yes. Why does he not? Well, because his real clients are stockholders. So it's immoral the amount of money he's making. I can make that argument. Okay. And there is, so what is most interesting about this, and there's some statistics. The other D, we have distrust of political movements, of experts, of elites, of institutions. Distrust. We have destruction of communal identity. Um, we have sort of geographic inequalities. Um, um, uh, we have the rich coastal elites, and we'll call it the hinterland or the heartland. And you're right about the populist movement. That was the wheat belt, and farmers were suffering. And again, the election of 1992, Bill Clinton won 43% of the vote. And he won 43% because Ross Perot gained almost 20%. And everyone made fun of Ross Perot because, there's a giant sucking sound. These multilateral and bilateral trade agreements are going to impoverish the working class. And this is really debatable, depending on which source you go to. Um, what did businesses do? They moved offshore. Like thieves in the night, they moved offshore. They destroyed communities. Um, and there's also my personal identity with political parties. This is really important that the Democratic Party in the United States is no longer the party of the working class. Period. It is the party of um, we can call it the party of the urban wealthy, the elite. Someone called them, another writer, not me, called them the Brahmin left. And their concerns are real to them. Um, but they don't resonate in the heartland. And the Republican Party, of all parties, um, have in some ways become a voice of the working poor. And that's where Trump, again, saw no one's paying attention to you. And I come from New York City, and I went to university in the Northeast. And where's that middle part of the country? It's the flyover place. When did I ever go to Wisconsin? Once. When did I go into Colorado? Once. Texas? Once. Um, but I fly. Oh, I go. Where do I fly? I fly New York to Los Angeles. So that realignment is, I think, extraordinarily interesting. And as a warning, because you said, is it anti democratic? You have to win an election and you have to have a party platform. And we've had, in January, we'll have 10 full years of Trump.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that, Paul. Now, as you mentioned before, and it sticks with me, in his own way, he's brilliant because he understands what you've been talking about. But there's another element here is not only does he understand, but he exacerbates it. Everything he does creates that divisiveness. How does that work? Why do people respond? And how, as a demagogue, can he establish a greater divisiveness? What process do we see working?
That's a problem because what does the right do? In every country, it wraps itself around the flag. And the left, parts of the left, and I have to be careful with the left, because I don't like the words liberal and conservative anymore because I don't know what they mean. I used to know what they meant, but uh, uh, even when I talk about left and right, I think the political scam. If you can follow my hand here, and I'm going to the left, and here I'm going to the right. I think the political landscape that the center has moved somewhat to the right. But the left wing parties have not moved with them. And Bill Clinton did. That's how he got elected. A Southern Baptist, from Arkansas. Who could think he could be president? And Tony Blair did the same thing. He took the Labor Party and he moved it a little bit to the right. So Trump feeds conspiracy theories. Um, he attacks the mainstream media, and Walter Cronkite should be most likely turning over in his grave, um, because the mainstream media uh, has been dishonest. Why? Because I think one reason that people have been dishonest is they see Trump as such a threat to democracy that they will use undemocratic means to get rid of him. And the more they try to get rid of him, he's Teflon. The more powerful he becomes. And I think he coined fake news. And I may be wrong, but I think he's the one that coined it. And he's going to drain the swamp. Um, I'm not sure exactly why the Biden administration let in 10 million people into the country. I don't want to get into words here of illegal or undocumented. There are 10 million people let in. About 8 to 10, we'll call it, during the height of immigration in the United States. And I'm a grandchild of immigrants. Okay, so I have to be very careful with this. I'm not anti-immigration. Um, from 1880 to 1920, uh, 20 million people were let in the country. And that's when the population of the US in 1920 was just over 100 million people. So when we talk about 10 million people coming into the US, the population of the US is almost 350 million. Okay, but it's 10 million in 3 years. So the ability to absorb them and the type of the type of incentives people were given when they came, when veterans weren't given the same opportunities. People can talk about unfairness, and um, to have complete open borders. Philosophical argument. Europe has open borders, and we thought there would be a big population shift. There wasn't, because you have to have language skills, and you have to have skills to get a job. You can move from Hungary to England when England was part of the EU, but what's your job going to be? So I think that nationalism and the immigration argument, um, anti-multilateral and bilateral trade agreements, um, sort of mixed signals on tax cuts, because he tax cuts for the wealthy, but he's also appealed to working class voters by saying that he's going to bring manufacturing jobs back to the US. I don't know how he's going to do this. Okay. Um, I read the New York Post and I read the New York Times, and I I'm amazed. There's two different stories.
Mm.
They're
You
reporting on
know,
two different Americans, and one of them is um, on emphasizing crime and unrest. It's on the front page of the New York Post almost every day, especially subway crime in New York, and it's not mentioned in the New York Times. So it's two different Americas are being presented, and Trump, you're absolutely right, um, uh, that uh, the political elite, immigrants, globalists, um, they uh, the climate and environment. And I said, I'm talking too much, maybe, but maybe we should concentrate on what the left wing populists, how come they're not winning in the United States? Um, and that is interesting. So you're right. Trump really is a conflict driver.
Well, it sounded a bit like a sine curve. I mean, starting with identifiable populist Andrew Jackson in the 1820s and 30s, nativism, right? And a resistance to immigration and Indians. He was down on the Indians, the Trail of Tears uh, from Georgia West. And then, okay, then it stopped, right? Something happened to modify Jackson's populism. And then you look again at the last part of the 19th century into 1910, 1920, and you find that it also diminished and we went into a different place. And now we have, certainly, as you say, the rise of populism, thanks to Trump, who exacerbates it. And you have the rise of populism in Europe, which may be a little different in terms of the inequality and pluralism issues. But there you have it, global, at least in the West. And so, my question to you is, what factors change populism to non-populism? What factors reinforce democracy? What factors make us move to a more pluralistic society in lieu of a populist society?
Why I, as an academic, and I try not to be emotional, is Trump. What Trump has done is there should be a balance of power. There are three branches of government. And Trump has realized he has tried to um, consolidate power in the executive branch. And you would never hear a president or anyone openly criticize a Supreme Court justice. It was just not done. No matter what Eisenhower thought of the decision to desegregate, he didn't like it. He didn't like Earl Warren. He thought it was a great mistake, but he never said it out loud. And he brought in the National Guard as well. And so did Bill Clinton, brought in the National Guard. So, so it's that, we can call Trump a right wing. Now, Democratic is interesting because is he breaking the law? No, he's using what I think the presidency has become not undemocratic, but hegemonic. And it's become hegemonic under Franklin Roosevelt because he's fighting a war. Maybe even before Franklin Roosevelt because of some of the New Deal executive orders were challenged in court. He tried to pack the court as well, but it becomes maybe imperial to under Roosevelt, um, and hegemonic has become too powerful. And part of that is war making. We have over 20 years of nonstop war, beginning. Part of the is the war of terror or on terror, and that empowers the president. Um, the presidency to mobilize these forces. So I'm a little bit upset where people should, is Trump a fascist? No. Well, the answer for me is no. Is he an authoritarian? Absolutely.
The question I put to you is, in terms of the sine curve of history,
Yes.
from better to worse and worse to better, we must have learned something about how this direction of populism has reversed itself, or at least modified itself. And I personally do not see anything on the horizon that suggests to me that Trump, as Trump, will change. He is what he
Oh,
is. His
I hope.
charisma, his popularity, his ability to take advantage of these divisive elements is not going to change. And I suppose you could say to me, well, with a new leader, it may change. But the new leader might also be a populist and have that same charisma and that same, divisiveness. And the question I put to you does this lead to a recreation of a more democratic, pluralistic society, or does it lead to violence? And maybe violence is the solution. It has been the solution in the past in various other theaters, but is it the solution in the US?
Absolutely not. The cure for a bad democracy is more democracy. It is not a military takeover. It is not a strong man. Be careful what you ask for. I'll quote Mick Jagger here. You'll get it and you'll be unhappy. Um, the cure for democracy is more democracy. And in a strange sense, the Democratic Party has to field a candidate, and there are people on the bench that I think uh, can uh, can win against whoever is the presumptive Republican candidate. And we should maybe stop talking about, well, we can't stop talking about Trump because um, he puts himself, he's the lead story and he makes himself a story. And I would think, thank goodness he's not better organized. Thank goodness that he has attention deficit. And thank goodness that he's all over the map just to get attention. And, he's most likely suffering from, I think most very famous people have a sense of narcissism. I don't want to I don't have an armchair here to play armchair psychiatrist, a type of malignant narcissism. Um, yeah, we have 3 more years of Trump. And I hope that his good policies are successful. And I hope that his bad policies are failures. And it's up to the midterm elections for him to get to be successful. I am quite shocked at when I look at he won 8% of the black vote in 2016, but he won 20% in 2024. And the Democratic Party won 80%. And you don't think that's anything. But when the election is 10,000 votes or 20,000 votes, and you're getting 20%, you've just increased your vote by 12% of a very important group. And Hispanics also. People would think, oh, they're going to vote Democratic, but a lot of Hispanics are very conservative. Um, Transgenderism and a lot of those issues does not resonate with them as long with abortion, and those cultural issues are actually some of them favor the right. So the Democratic Party, someone said it's 80-20. They should stop supporting policies at the national level. They can do it at the individual level, but national Democratic politicians should not be supporting policies that only 20% of Americans support. And they say 80% of Americans are against, people, I'm not, everyone should live in decency and fairness. Okay, please. I'm not, anti, you know, you know, transgender, but, people don't like, uh, people don't like biological men changing in their daughters' dressing rooms. It's the one thing that gets you kicked out of high school when I was in high school is to someone push you into the girls' bathroom. You're immediately suspended from school. So there are things there that the Democratic Party um, has to have a candidate, and there are lots of strong people.
You talked about trust, and we
Yes,
know that trust is a good thing, plurality is a good thing. But one of the organizations, the institutions you mentioned, had a continuing level of trust in our society is the military.
that's right.
And Trump is expanding the military, expanding weapons, expanding the budget by huge amounts of money. At the same time, he's actually using the military for bombing Iran. And yesterday he said he was going to, quote, bomb the shit out of Moscow if it didn't abide by his instructions and so forth. I don't think we can believe what he said, but he's certainly flexing the military muscle of the United States. At the same time, we have this, and going back to the 19th century, this manifest destiny thing, where he feels the United States ought to take additional territory for reasons that are slightly bizarre. In fact, very bizarre. What's the connection? What's the connection between the trust in the military, his favoring the military, building the military, and his notion of trying to expand the borders, the territories of the United States?
If we had 5 people around a table listening to a Trump speech, or gave 15 examples of where he makes some type of statement, what we have to do is, what's the noise and what's the signal? Because and that's a very important thing to talk about, is that sometimes he's just making noise to make noise, and who takes it seriously? But it makes front page noise, and Canada's not becoming the 51st state. And what Trump, maybe he gets confused because within 100 miles of the U.S. border is most of the Canadian economy, especially in auto parts. It's a great trading partner. Um, but to think that they want to become part of the America is absolutely ludicrous. And he he um, he um, he drove Canadian nationalism, and he got a conservative, he got a liberal elected. And the same with this Greenland. Um, there are reasons why the U.S. has interest in Greenland, but it's not ours. And the people that do own it, I think Denmark, um, they're not going to give it up. And how about asking the people in Greenland, so that the U.S. could negotiate? And we don't want the Russians there. There's no aspect of no plans, I think, for the Russians to land in Greenland. Um, but I think there's some underneath, like levels down, 100 meters down. Greenland is vital to American interests. Period. And it was during the Second World War, because you flew planes from the U.S. to Greenland, to Great Britain. Um, but to make these stupid statements, the Gulf of America, you know, 50% of the Gulf of Mexico is borders Mexico. So okay, you want to feed that? Uh, it's just noise. So we overreact to it. So we have to be careful with Trump of what's really happening, and also because I teach this for a living, um, capability and intent. So what's your capability is one thing. So if you say you're going to do, what's your intent? Then we don't know what the real intention is with Trump. What is he doing? Just to create headlines and to create noise when he does something else? Is it a diversion? So some people talk about spectacle politics, and Trump is the spectacle, and his ratings is the game show host, and he is the first president in this century. He's not a politician. He comes from the business world and the entertainment world. And it's about time we had someone who wasn't a professional politician. But he also doesn't know how Washington works. And the US is not his corporation. So he's making fundamental error after fundamental error. And um, he doesn't have the temperament. Hillary Clinton was right. Does he have the temperament to be president? Of course not. And we elected him second time. And he would have been elected in 2020 without COVID.
Hmm.
That was a very abnormal election, 2020. Um, so he feeds fear, he feeds anxiety, he feels that you're left behind. And you have to get an economist on the show, because my degree is not in economics. Have our wages gone down? Are wages stagnant? Well, how do you calculate them? If you include the cost of housing and how much that cost, then our wages have gone down. If you take out some of those calculations, again, you have liars, damn liars, and statisticians. So, so there's a popular belief that our wages have gone down, um, but they certainly haven't gone up as much as the wealth of the rich.
So if you take all these things together, Paul, and take the rise or the re-rise of populism in this country, Trump's use of populism as a way to achieve additional power, his development of military organizations, including Homeland Security, Border Patrol, and all that, as a ramp up to police state. Everybody that I know feels that he is doing just that. Not only LA, it's terrifying people, including citizens. If you take all that and put it together, and then you look at his effect on foreign policy and foreign relations, you wonder where things are going. And I know that historians hate to answer this question, but I'm going to ask you anyway, Paul. Where are things going?
If I knew the future, I'd be at the race course. And that's it. The problem is that many of the experts have been wrong, even when they're talking about Trump's first 5 months in office. They were thinking about disaster. So where this is going in foreign policy is that I think there was a lot of uncertainty under President Biden, who's I couldn't imagine him walking into a room and dominating it and chairing a meeting and actually uh, being the smartest person in the room. You don't have to be the smartest person in the room, but you have to have control over information, like John F. Kennedy has. Um, he went into a room and he could dominate it. So there was some anxiety about, the mixed signals from the Biden administration. So in foreign policy, 500 million Europeans have to be protected from 140 million Russians by the United States. Are we serious? Uh, 1 billion Muslims, people are going to be angry with me, have to be protected from 14 million Jews. Um, what's the real threat? What's really at stake here in foreign policy? Trump is a transactional figure, but he has accelerated. Jay, when does the post-war period end? We go pre-war, war, post-war. It's 80 years after the end of the Second World War. And that world that was constructed for our benefit, well, and you and I, myself, my generation, a boomer generation, um, from 1950 to I think 1964, America became wealthy. Uh, People were able to have a good manufacturing job, send their kids to school, and we paid for. Um, we protected the seas with a brilliant navy and air force. Um, we had a war in Vietnam, not for the democracy, but to give our alliance partners the idea that um, we willing to go to war to protect our alliance members. And whatever we think of the Vietnam War, is that America from the Korean War um, until Trump, that system, everyone was comfortable with it. And the elites were comfortable with it. My professors in graduate school, realists, and, they were comfortable with it, that this is the way the world operated, not realizing that another world was rising as well, and that is Asia and China. And, I don't want to talk about Japan because Japan and the former and Germany, they tied into that system that we built. We built it. We built NATO. For whose interest? Ours. We defend Japan. For whose interest? Ours. We paid higher tariffs. For whose interest? We didn't want Europe to be poor. And European economies grew, and they grew their societies. at our expense. And guess what? We could afford it. So what Trump has done, and he basically said, I don't want to do this anymore. So he is very bluntly, without summits, without meetings, by fiat and by his own personality, he says, we're not going to do this anymore. And if Europe doesn't want to defend itself, then why should I? Why should we? It's our blood and our money. And the answer is it in our interest? Realism 101. Um, and what's in America's interest? So that is not isolationism, but it really is going back to a very traditional form of American foreign policy, one that you studied and that I studied. It's take care of the home. It's the homeland first. And I think people like that.
Mm.
I'm a globalist, but globalism and internationalism has certainly benefited me.
I'm reminded of that old slogan: if we forget history, we'd be
Yes.
doomed to repeat it. The question is, what parts of it, what parts of it do we repeat?
Well, it's the old joke that history doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes.
Yeah,
So we have to be careful of those lessons of the past. You're completely right. What lessons? America was not engaged in the international system, the interwar period, and no one knew it was the interwar period at the time. You know, my mother was born the day World War One died, and my mother's name is Peace.
mm.
And my mother was a captain in the U.S. Army in the Second World War.
Ah, oh,
She,
wow.
in Europe, so she saw a lot of war. She must have been the only captain in the U.S. Army with the name Peace. But no one thought there's going to be. You're born in 1920, you're going to die in a war. 60 million people died. And part of it is because the United States retreated to the homeland. It
Yeah,
doesn't concern us. And it didn't even concern us when Nazi Germany took Western Europe. We weren't going to save Western Europe. Roosevelt couldn't do it. His hands were tied. Um, so we really, and no one's, and don't say thank you. We did it because it's in our interest. But it's nice to say thank you anyway. So Trump is basically saying, he's basically walking into the room and said, you owe us. This is what we did for you. You don't like to hear it. And, we want you to spend more. And they're doing it, 5% more spending in Europe. So America is more powerful, maybe. How are you going to use that power? We don't want to. We're not going to go to war with Russia over Ukraine. We're not going to do it. The Europeans aren't going to. No one wants to.
no, no.
But your domestic issue is we have had periods in American history, the McCarthy period. We've had witch hunts. We're not talking about Salem, but we've had witch hunts, the real ones. We've had uh, uh, witch hunts, excuse me. Um, um, by the way, maybe it's too much of a tangent, but this growth of alternative media has reshaped everything because CNN may think it's important, but who listens to CNN? And I ask my students who are 20 years old, do you watch television? They don't watch television. So who's home watching television? Where are people getting their news? How are they getting their disinformation or misinformation? So domestically, um, it's the I don't like the power of the federal government. I think I went to the University of Virginia, and Jefferson talked about defensive democracy, the ability to push the state back. I believe that states um, uh, democratically uh, should be able to push the federal government back. So Trump is misplaying his hands by Arresting people who have been here for generations. It's absolutely stupid. Um, I think there should be a settlement on that. And, Robert Kennedy and Cesar Chavez talked about this 50 years ago. What are we doing with this cheap, expendable labor from Mexico? What rights do they have? Why can't we pay them more? Give them a driver's license, grant them a driver's license, give them permits. Um, I can pay a buck more for my strawberries. So there's a lot of dishonesty in this. We want the cheap labor, and I see it here in France. I live in an apartment house where once a week someone cleans it. Who cleans it? No one that looks like me.
We're kind of out of time here. I wanted
Mhm.
to get your closing thoughts as a teacher of many years in so many subjects, especially history. I'd like to get your thoughts on what you would leave with our audience, with whatever demographics or generations might be viewing this now or later. What are your suggestions? What are your thoughts to them?
What distresses me the most is the absence of dialogue. And it's dialogus. It's through the word, it's through logic, it's through speech, it's through people having a sense of a greater community. So this tying into becoming the enemy of Trump um, uh, um, means that he's not gonna go away. How many times have they impeached him? Twice, and people are talking about impeaching him again. It's not going to happen. Um, I think it's really to to call him out on. You have the right as a democratic citizen, a citizen in a democracy, um, um, to be unhappy with policy. And it's not my country, love it or leave it. It's my country, love it or leave it. If wrong, make it right. So it's the mechanism of making it right. And this is the job of the traditional media. New York Times, I don't trust. It's not all the news fit the print. They ignore stories. So, you do this for a living. What do you put on the front page? What's newsworthy? And what sells newspapers? So, Trump is just clickbait to infinity. You can always make money from it. um, and we have to go back to what. Yes, this is stupid, but when he has a policy that makes some sense, say it makes some sense. But that is very difficult for people to do because, again, populism is not ideological. It's not like fascism or socialism where you have a list of things. It's the Trump uses it. It's us against them. And so I think it's good to have an honest debate. Uh, no, it shouldn't be a debate. It has to be a dialogue because I don't like debate because at the end of the debate I lost, but you haven't convinced me of anything. I still believe what I believe. So um, um, I don't know if we can get to that point of honesty. And heaven forbid, this is to end this. If the Democrats don't come up with a viable candidate, um, and the Republicans win in 2028, whether it's Vance or Rubio, whomever becomes the nominee, we're talking 2032. And my God, they win again, 2036. Um, this is awful because democracy should be the politics in the United States of alteration. The Democrats win one term, two terms, and then the Republicans win. It goes back and forth and back and forth. It's abnormal to have one party winning for so long, and it has to be the Democratic Party that cleans its own house. I'm not sure if it can do it. And when people talk about Trump, maybe they have to talk about Trumpism. and really talk about what we talk today. What's driving this? It doesn't come out of nowhere. People lost their jobs. People can't make it on minimum wage. They need two jobs. Their neighborhoods have changed and they don't feel. I went back to my old neighborhood in New York. I thought it was amazingly changed. There's a halal butcher's and a mosque on the corner where I used to live. I said, wow, this is really interesting. I didn't feel threatened. Not everyone is comfortable with that.
Paul, it's so interesting that, as we discussed early on in this conversation, disparity in wealth leads to disparity in power,
Yep.
and disparity in power leads to further disparity of wealth. So it has within the seeds of itself a kind of perpetuation, and this is terrifying. Anyway, we'll have to leave it there. I hope to talk to you again about such things in the future. Thanks so much to our guest, Dr. Paul Scott, Professor Emeritus in history, especially, well, I say American history, but it's global history at Kansai Gaidai University near Osaka in Japan, who joins us from Paris. I'm Jay Fidell, host of History is Here to Help in this episode, which we are calling The Rise of Populism, Threat and Opportunity. Thanks to our viewers for watching. We'll see you again soon for the next one. Aloha.